Why would you want to make a drawer pull? I mean, you can always go buy knobs. Well, maybe you're making a piece of period furniture. Maybe you're repairing a period furniture that's already got a wooden knob. Maybe you don't want to be limited to maple and oak or cherry, whatever the choice. There's a limited number of flavors that you can make. Maybe you're making a custom piece of furniture and you really want to make it special, so you want to have inserts into it. So there's lots of ways to do it. I'm going to pass out this bag of inserts. The white stuff is bovine ivory. That means my dog's bone. And you can also use a plug cutter, cut plugs of contrasting wood. So those are all options. Here's what, when you cut the bone, that's how you cut it. Cut a sliver out. And then square it up enough with a file or something, and that you can drill a hole into a scrap piece of wood and hammer it in with some CA to actually round it off and finish it. Round off the button and then part it off and make another one. So that's how you can make that. Here's a few different knobs that I've made. I'll just pass those around. Now, knobs kind of call for using a screw chuck, and unless you buy a screw chuck, which you can do, but you can make them fairly easily. I like to use a threaded block like Steve demonstrated a few months ago, and that works just real well. You tap it with a Beal tap. Some people call it a Be-All tap. It's made by John Beal, but maybe it is a Be-All tap. Get the hole centered that you're going to put the screw in, because you do want it to run center, and that's the hardest part, is getting that thing centered. I like to use a little washer as spacers if I need it, if I've got more screws sticking out than I need, but you can change the size of your washer to fit the bottom of your project. And if you're making chess men, for example, or knobs, where you're doing a repetitive project, go ahead and make your screw chuck, the base of it fit, or make the little washer fit the base. That way you don't have to measure and fit. You just make it fit to that little spacer. I've already showed you how to drill a block of wood, so we're going to dispense with that. But I do it the same way. Take a little block of wood, put it in your chuck, and I use the same size drill hole. What size screw you use, kind of whatever you like, but I found, I'll pass this around, a number 10 size screw I find works well for me. The 12 is a little bit large. You want to use the same size screw that you're going to mount this into your furniture from the back side with. Wood screws with a smooth shank don't work real well because they don't anchor in here. You need that screw to be able to hold it in here. And sheet metal screws tend to work pretty well. Sometimes, despite your best effort, and I use a little epoxy on it. I don't know if you can pick that up. But it's glued in there. Despite your best efforts, it may or may not
tip it straight up. Yep.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong camera. There we go. Despite your best efforts, you may wind up having to use a screwdriver to hold it while you're putting your block of wood on. And that's not such a big deal. These are easy to make, and they're kind of disposable. This one I haven't really had to do that, but I want to show you that in case you run into it where it winds up being a little loose. Now this is side grain. Now the point I want to make clear, you know, there's three real critical principles that novice turners, if you get this under your belt, you can lick anything. And the first one I already talked about, that's sharp tools. And if you don't have a sharp tool, you don't know how to sharpen it, you got to work on that. That's another lesson, but they really need to be sharp, and you don't wait till they get dull. When the edge, you know, I think Dave Ellsworth in his book's got a diagram, and he says, and I don't know if he's right, but I know he knows a lot more about wood turning than I do, that if this is the sharpness level right here on this axis, and this is time, it doesn't go like this. That's not the curve. He says it goes like this. So you reach a point where you have very fast drop off on the sharpness of the tool. So you want to keep going back to the grinder and dressing that bevel. The second point that I'd want to make that a lot of people have is riding the bevel. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into this project. The third one that's critical is cut with the grain. Now what does that mean? You hear a lot of people say cut downhill. To me, cutting downhill is the most confusing term because it doesn't make sense when you start changing the orientation of the wood. For example, this is a spindle blank, like we've been doing on the lamp pull and the pillbox. Cutting downhill or cutting with a grain means you're always cutting from high to low. So you're coming in from this direction, and then when you get to the bottom, you don't go uphill, you got to come in from the other direction. That's cutting with the grain. That's the same way you'd sharpen a pencil. And I know everybody in here has probably sharpened a pencil. You don't sharpen a pencil this way, you go this way. So it's each cut is being supported by fibers in front of it. So if you think of a piece of wood as a bunch of fibers or a bunch of pencils, you know, you're cutting in this way, you're cutting in this way. Now if it's a bowl or side grain, as this knob is, your pencils they're not going this way like we've been turning, they're going this way. So the trick is we'll find the pencil. So when you say cut downhill, what does that mean? Well, it makes people think, well, you go from here down. Well, that's not right. You're not going from large to small. You got to cut with the supported fibers. So what that means is, on this particular project, here we see it, the grain's going this way, or straight at you as it's going around in circles. What that means is, as we cut in, you know, when we shape the knob like this, we go from here inside out. And from the outside, from the top, we're going like this. And that's just opposite from what we were doing here. So if this were a bowl, and think about this as a little bowl. When you're doing the bottom of a bowl, and this is the headstock, you're always cutting from the small end to the big end. That's cutting the supported with the grain, because that's the direction of the grain. So as you cut along this way from small to large, you know, the cut is always being supported by other fibers. Now, cutting downhill to me gets confusing when you look at this. It works real fine when you're talking about this one. It gets confusing. So I don't like to use the term cutting downhill. It's cutting with the grain. Does that make sense? If you got to get that down in your head. I mean, you just absolutely have to have that where it's absolutely second nature all the time. Every time you cut any piece of wood, any cut, you've got to understand that cutting with a grain. And if you don't get that right, you're always going to be struggling with your wood. And I won't say you can't cut it, you're just not going to get your best cut. Now on this little project, you're going to see me cutting the wrong way sometimes, part of the way, because it's the easiest way to get in there with the tool. But it's usually on the beginning cuts. When I get to a point where I can cut it the right way, I can clean up those bad cuts with a better cut. The other thing you don't do, you don't use a spindle rough and gouge on side grain work. Even little stuff, you just don't do it. It's not designed for that. It doesn't have the strength, although it'll handle it on a little project, just don't do it. Pretend this is a little bowl and use a little small bowl gouge. We'll crank up speed a little bit. We're just going to round this off. I don't worry about the chip out on the end here because we're going to round that end over anyway. Here's where I'm going to cut the wrong way. I know I'm cutting the wrong way, and I'm going to do that just to get some wood out of the way. Now I can go in and cut the right way, supported fibers. Starting here, working to the end is just like working on the end of a bowl. You're going to go from the small end of the bowl to the large end of the bowl. When I come back on the underside, I got to go in the other direction from the large end to the small end. From the small end to the large end. You got to be careful with that, being aware of that wing and what it's going to do to your cut. There's an old saying, form follows function, which means what is it for, and design it to make it do what it's supposed to do. So if it's a knob, you want to have enough room back here to grab, so you got to decide how thick this is going to be. If you're doing side grain, you probably don't want to make this too small because it can snap. You want at least 5/8 of an inch thick. I like to put just a little bit of a design feature down near the base like that. And come back here. Now we're going to come in and round off the front. Now here again, sharp tools and light cut because there's not a whole lot holding that screw chuck on there. So you got to, and I'm having to remove that a little bit of a damage from that point. I shouldn't have used that point tool. Live center, I should have used something flatter, and I had choices, I just forgot to use it. Now, depending on what you're going to do, now it's time to embellish the knob. You can put burn rings on it, you can texture it. The problem with texturing is it's hard to make all of them look the same. So if you're doing a cabinet and you start using that texturing tool, it's hard to get them exactly right. Now, if you're making a whole bunch of them, I'll show you one technique you can use that can work pretty well. Is you make you a dedicated shaper with a scraper pattern on it, and you can make them out of file. I'm not advocating using files for cutting tools for wood turning because generally they're not a good idea. But in this case, it's for limited purpose, very small object where I'm getting very, very close to the support, and I think it'll work just fine. And I'll pass this around. So I'm going to come in from the off the center a little bit. Again, I need to cut on center. I need to be in a somewhat of a negative rake position. probably want to take off that little bit of a nib in the middle. And there's, you can cut that profile any way you like it. It's just a bit of a tedious effort to get it, design it to fit. But you can make it as complicated as you like. And that's just one way. If you want to do a bunch of knobs and you want them to have them look alike, that's the best way to do it, is make you a custom scraper. Any questions on end grain knobs? We still got a couple of minutes left, so we're going to...
It's not an end grain knob.
I'm sorry. Thanks for catching me. We're going to do an end grain now. This is a side grain knob. We're going to do an end grain knob now.
Pass that around.
Sure. The other knob for end grain knobs, a typical knob is what you call a shaker peg, and they're easy to make, as I'll show you. Now you can hold this in that chuck, but the other cool tool I want to show you is a collet chuck. And I've already sized my blank to fit. I think that's 5/8. Yeah. This collet chuck works real well as long as you can size your tenon consistently to get pretty close. If it's too fat and it doesn't fit in there, it's not going to tighten up. If it's too small, you're not going to be able to clamp it real good. But it holds it real tight. Actually, with this particular model, with this knurling on here, I can do it tight enough with my hands, but if I needed more, it comes with some Tommy bars in case you really want to crank down on it. This one is from Craft Supply, and it comes in 1 1/4 as well as 1 inch. I think the one you get from, Beal has one as well. It comes in 1 1/4, 1 inch, and it's made in the U.S. It's probably higher quality, but I read a review and they talked about this knurling and they were happy with this one, and this is about half the price. So for half the price with knurling that I can do most of it by hand in many instances, for half the price, it looked like a no-brainer to me, and I've been real pleased with the quality. This is, I think it's an apprentice from Craft Supply. It's a Beal chuck. I mean, it's a collet chuck. Now, I think this is almost exactly, maybe made by the same manufacturer as the one that Craft Supply sells. But Craft Supply has a tendency to not sell much of anything that's over a 1 inch that doesn't fit on a mini lathe. So they don't sell the 1 1/4 inch model. And theirs about the same price. It's about $90 for this set. And I say set because it comes in, it's got a 3/8 inch, a 1/2 inch, a 1/4 inch, and 3/4 inch, and 5/8 inch. And it's got an adapter to bring it down to 1 inch, so I could use it on my mini lathe.
You said that's not from Craft Supply?
This is from Craft Supply.
Oh, okay, that's set.
This set.
Okay.
The one that I think is from the same manufacturer that you get from Penn State is what I misspoke. Penn State sells, I think, same, but they don't sell it in 1 1/4. They only sell it in 1 inch. Same price. The pictures look to be the same. So this is regular spindle type, grain going this way. So cutting downhill, we're going to go from large to small, and it is cutting with a grain. And some people call these mushroom knobs. The top generally has the appearance of a mushroom, and then it's domed. They're usually very simple. But I think from the ones, did I pass out? No. Here's the ones of the little shaker knobs. Here's one made out of ebony with contrasting wood insert. This one's out of cherry. It's got a slot. It's got a slot cut in it, so you can drill a hole in your furniture, and that's how the shakers, I understand it. Stick this in, and then you drive a wedge on the other end to hold it.
Actually, you don't drill the hole the whole way through.
You don't have to.
Yeah, you put the wedge in and then you just pound it in. the hole.
Some people do it that way yeah, so you don't see the wedge. Sometimes you drill all the way through so you can see the wedge, and they're a lot simpler and faster to put in. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, but both ends work, both techniques work. Here's one where I use some bovine ivory. And the key to these is make sure that the tenon exactly fits the hole you're going to mount it in. Because once you turn it, there's no going back. And you can't put that drawer on a lathe to resize the hole. Trust me. It won't work. I'll pass that around, Jerry.
You grind this on a regular grinder, Mike?
I did. Yeah, I definitely wasn't going to put it on my CBN wheel.
Because this stuff is extremely hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Now, which one is best, side grain or end grain? It's really a function of what kind of wood you got. That's part of it. How big the knobs are. Bigger knobs lend themselves to side grain. Smaller knobs lend themselves to end grain or spindle type knobs. And also how you're going to mount it. The screws don't do well by mounting into end grain, so this is not something you're gonna have to glue in. But if you make it long, like 3/4 inch for a drawer, and you glue it, it's not coming out. You use wood glue. If you get it sized properly and you use wood glue, it's not coming out. If you're going to stain this project, stain is going to darken end grain. And if it's matching your project, you know, maybe you don't want this darker, but maybe you do. So there's several different considerations as to, you know, which one is best. It just depends on what you want for your project. Let's see if any questions on anything I covered? See if I missed anything.
That's like a normal swept-back wing?
No, this is not a swept-back. This is a C. That's a good question, Mike. And it's one you got to play with to understand. Some people understand it. Other people got to play with it to find out. This is what you call a C-shaped gouge, in that the profile looks somewhat like a C. It's fairly open. This is what I think probably Stuart Batty would tend to use on his 40-40-40 bowl gouge, I believe. The problem with it is you can't make it swept back. If you try to make it swept back, you wind up with these really razor sharp thin wings that will break and grind away real fast, and they won't serve the purpose of like an Ellsworth or an Irish grind. You just can't get away. It just can't be done. Whereas the swept back tends to be either an elliptical grind, see if I can draw one, or a parabolic grind like that. I think that's a parabolic, or it's more of a V-shaped. Now, the ones, anybody got a bowl gouge from Wood River, Pinnacle? Yeah. It's the long red handles from Woodcraft. They're going to have a V, and they're terrible because they jam. Everything clogs in here. The parabolic has a similar shape, but there's enough room to clear flutes, depending on who makes it and what the particular design is. But this is the kind of grind, either one of these, that you get a swept back wing on.
Actually, I don't have any from Woodworkers.
You know, they're terrible. They really are. And that's just not my opinion. That's the professional opinion on a couple of people that where somebody say, "Hey, I'm having a problem with this," and somebody look at it and say, "Yeah, it's bad design on the flute."
Mike,
Mhm.
on the knobs themselves, you talked about using the files, you're making a bunch of them, do the detail.
A rosette.
Yeah, to do the rosette on the end. What if you know, how do you want to make a dozen knobs, but you want the main profile to be all the same?
You do that with sizing the bottom, cutting the blanks all the same size, size the bottom, and the rest of it is just eye and practice, and it's just not that hard to duplicate something small like that. You know, if you got it the same diameter and you got it the same length, there's not enough variation that anybody would see. You know, you can line them all up, and I've tested this theory because when I wrote this article that some of y'all might have read, it was in American Woodturner on Turn the Knob. Those are the knobs that went on a wood project I made for my tool shop. So I turned a lot of knobs, and you can line them up, and you can see minor variations, but you start grouping them a little bit where your eye can see them, and put those on one drawer and these on another drawer, you'll never notice them. Or put one on one set and one on the other set, you'll never notice them.
I always remember the comment Mark Barr made, and he said, I've got a table with 4 different legs on it, so hardly anybody ever notices. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, collet set, shaking knob, Pennsylvania. Okay, I've covered everything I want. Thank you for having me. I'll be around for a couple of minutes.
Did you go into riding the bevel?
No, thank you for reminding me. I brought a couple of training aids with me. All right, this is a gouge. This is a bowl gouge. This is the bevel. The bevel is the part that's ground away on any tool. That's the bevel. That's the part you're riding. So when your wood is turning on any particular piece of wood, yeah. Let's say you're skimming along the front. That's riding the bevel. Now, as a practical matter, you can't completely ride the bevel or it's not going to cut because this has been rounded a little bit, but most of them, when they come off the grinder, they're concave. So you wouldn't cut. You have to lift it just slightly so there's just a little bit of gap in the back. So you see that little bit of gap? The problem is a lot of people, the beginners, they're going to cut like this, and that's not riding the bevel, that's scraping. You're going to have this big angle back here, and you're going to get a terrible cut. Everything's going to be a scrape. So the trick is when you're riding the bevel, you anchor ABC, anchor the tool on the tool rest, engage the bevel, but not the end, and then lift the handle until it starts cutting it. ABC, anchor, bevel, cut. Now, so you look at the skew and say, okay, well here's the bevel, right? This part is ground away. When you're cutting, that's not the bevel. The bevel is the part where you're actually cutting, and you're not cutting with the whole end. So if you're coming along like this, you're cutting in the bottom third because that's the part that's supported on the tool rest. Your bevel may be just that little corner right there. That's the bevel that you're riding. Now, if you're cutting on the end of a knob and you're using the long point, then that's the bevel, that corner right there, because that's where you're cutting and where you have just a little bit of a gap between the wood and the tool the further back you get. That's the bevel.
So you're trying to get the same plane as that angle on there, so it lines up with what you're cutting on there. Like say you were trying to do that, I use a skew when I'm doing a pin most of the time. So you hold that thing at the closest angle to being almost flat with whatever you're doing, but you're only hitting the tip. So you're not really hitting the whole bevel, but you're hitting the tip at a pretty close angle to what?
Pretty close.
About the same plane.
Pretty close. The trick is, I had a class on the skew, and I thought I knew how to use a skew, and I was fairly competent, but I had a tendency to go right into the wood. And I'd practice and practice and practice, where when I hit it just about on the money. But that's a learned skill, and it's hard to maintain. If I went away from it for a little while, I wouldn't be able to do that. But if you always anchor the tool, and then lift until it engage the cut. You're going to be right every time. So you practice every time you engage the tool in wood, anchor, bevel, lift it until it starts cutting. That way you never get into a scraping mode. And I've seen so many novice turners, and I'll call them novice. A beginner, I think, is somebody who just started. A novice turner is somebody that's still struggling with the basics, and they may have been struggling with basics for 10 years. Right, Jerry? I mean, not pointing out Jerry necessarily, but you know, I have heard people say, you know, when they were scraping and somebody said, well, you need to ride the bevel, and then you explain it to them and they says, oh, I never really understood what riding the bevel really meant. And it's rubbing the part right behind the cutting edge. Now, Stuart Batty uses the term floating the bevel, which is probably a more correct term, because if you ride it exactly and it's exactly flat, you're really not going to be cutting. You're just going to be, it's just going to be laying there. You're going to have to lift it up just a little bit and float the bevel. Thank you for asking that question. Anything else? Thank you very much. Oh, Rob, one more.
How can we get a hold of that article now? Where do we find it at online?
It's on my blog, and it was,
That's good.
you know, that it was on the it's on the calendar for announcing this. And you go to my blog and you can see all my handouts. I have an article on the knobs, 2 articles. I've got an article on the lamp pulls. I've got a handout on the pillboxes, and I've got a separate YouTube video on all 3 projects. And
Okay.
now to get to the YouTubes, you can get to my YouTube channel from the blog, and then you just have to find that particular video. I quit posting links to every single video because I'm putting so many out there.